2, 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore, where I am one of the hosts, but tonight we are going to be continuing our themed month of non-comic book heroes from the Western world.
Sure.
So,
I'm fine with that.
Non-superhero comic book adaptations, and specifically from Western comics. And
Right.
Today is the Terry Zwigoff adaptation of Daniel Klove's Ghost World from 2001, starring the one and only Scarlett Johansson and also the one and only Thora Birch.
Yep.
So who is hosting this shenanigan?
It was me, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Good times.
actually suggested it, but I knew Jake would like it more, so I gave
Yes.
All right, Jake, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit more about this movie?
So, as Dane told us, this is the Terry Zwigoff film from 2001, which IMDb does not have a particularly great description, but it's serviceable. But essentially, this is a film about two girls who have just graduated high school, and they know they want to move in together, but there's not much else that they've really plotted out. And essentially, it's a movie about their coming to terms with life after school. And it's in specifically the relationships that one has to, the way relationships change. That's I think a central point of it. So at any rate, we're going to go ahead and start. I suppose I'll start with Dave, and I'll go counterclockwise the way that I see people on the screen. So, Dave, is this your first impression of this movie, and what's your overall thoughts?
Well, this was my first time watching the film. I'd never seen it before. Always heard a lot about it. I know that there was quite hype about it at the time, and I thought it was about some like comical girls coming across some ghosts in a world and doing some ghost detecting shit. All the time. So to me, when I went into it, I was expecting that. Well, no, it was not. So it ended up being a film that didn't exactly make me understand it at all. It's kind of like a one view in on a world, and you don't really know exactly what happens in the end. But I do like the colors. That it's like she's not ever wearing the same thing twice.
No.
And I do like the fact that it kind of like dwells on this like older music and older style of music a little bit, and I do like that. I do like the whole the art thing that she was trying to do inside this art house like film, and I don't know. There were bits and pieces that I liked, and bits and pieces that I just didn't understand. So I'm still open-minded on this film. I liked what's his name's performance.
Steve Buscemi.
Steve Buscemi. Yeah. I always tend to like his roles, and this one, he actually shined a little bit more as like a co-actor. You know, normally you just see bits and pieces of his comedy. Normally you don't get to see him being like this like regular guy, you know, and
he's more of a character
like
actor.
the fact that you get to see a more human side to his sort of awkward like existence.
Right.
So that aspect of the film I like, but I'm not entirely sure whether I entirely liked our main character's choices.
Okay. All right. How about you, Dane?
Well, I first saw this. I'd heard about this movie from my brother, who was a huge fan of it. I first encountered Terry Zwigoff's films when I saw Crumb, which is a documentary about R. Crumb, the artist. And I absolutely adored that film. Loved everything about it. And later on, a few years later, I saw Bad Santa, which I also loved, which he also directed. And then, but that was after this film. So this one I saw years after that. And, I love Terry Zwigoff's work in general. I think he's got a sense of humor that reminds me a lot of mine. I think his grasp of character is really strong. They're all very strange characters. They're all very not mainstream, but I also relate a lot to them. And even like a nonfiction person, like R. Crumb, I was like, I just like watching this person, for as odd as he is and all that stuff. I like odd people and odd characters and stuff because I am an odd character myself. I should hope. But this film I was very much a fan of because I loved the dialogue. I thought the script was incredible. I loved what Steve Buscemi did. I loved what Thora Birch did. I loved what Scarlett Johansson did. I think the way that they speak to each other and the way that they speak about the people around them reminds me a lot of like my brother and I when we were younger, and also like reminds me of myself and some of my friends and stuff. I could definitely relate to and I don't say that lightly because I tend to resent a lot of movies that, especially like mainstream comedies that are like, this is you and your friends, like The Hangover. And I'm like, no, this is about as far removed from my life as possible. So what's nice is then you have a movie like this that comes along and I was like, okay, I understand this because this movie and Juno remind me a lot of like just the way that I would speak to people I do and, some of the feelings that I had at that age and stuff. Plus, it relates to a lot of kind of harsh truths about life, especially in a small town, but like life in general, that, the people that you think are going to be your lifelong friends and the plans that you think you're going to have for your life almost never work out. And the people you think are going to be with you forever almost never are with you forever. And in fact, especially at that age, you can drift apart pretty readily. So I think it's a great statement of that. It's a great statement of, you can be so against the mainstream and so against fitting in and that kind of stuff. And that can work for you for for quite a long time, but it also comes at the price of not necessarily getting along with people and feeling very alone and, that kind of stuff. So it's very much a double-edged sword. I think it relays all those themes really beautifully. I think Thora Birch had already done such beautiful work in American Beauty, and she continues to do beautiful work here. Scarlett Johansson was still kind of a young up-and-comer at the time. I do find it kind of odd looking back at this movie how when she was younger, her voice was actually deeper than it is now. And I don't know why that is. Usually it's the opposite. But I think they both did incredible work, and I'm a big fan of this film.
Well, it's obvious she stopped smoking all those cigars that she was.
Right. Yeah. How about you, Mo?
This is definitely not my first time seeing the movie. I feel like I saw it probably around the age that these girls are supposed to be in the movie, actually. Maybe a little later. I was never, super hyped on it. I enjoyed it, Thora Birch is stupid hot in it. And definitely probably informed my taste as far as visually in girls for a while after this. I think it's, my first impression this time is almost more of a proper
And you got
first
Miss Scarlett.
impression.
I can't forget Miss Scarlett in that department.
Yeah,
No.
she's all right. She's all right. But it's, this time around, I feel like there's a lot of the movie that's still great. I feel like there's a lot of it that makes me cringe a little, in hindsight. Like, I probably thought it was way more brilliant at the time than I do now as like a fully formed adult. Dane pretty much hit it on the head. I mean, it is kind of a coming of age story about all that stuff. So
Right.
in a way, it's not, paying off some of the behavior that you see in the movie. So the message is there. It's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, when I saw it initially, I probably, thought a lot of the stuff was more the way I thought than it is now, obviously,
Right.
It's kind of a depressing movie in a lot of ways, but also not. It's a strange deal they got going on there. But I like it, man. I mean, it's got some good comedy in there. The whole vibe of the movie in general, I think, is really great, but it's got some areas that are like, I guess I feel about them the same way you feel about like a band that you used to think was epic, and then you listen to it as an adult and you're kind of like, not so much. I still really enjoy it, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously I don't relate to these kids as much as I might have at the time.
All right. How are you, Forrest?
No, this is not the first time I've seen this. First time I saw it was about I want to say maybe 20 years ago on VHS when I was about 14. It was at my friend's had some friends of mine had it on VHS, and I watched it there. And I hadn't read and I immediately thought, and initially I thought these these two girls were cool because they kind of just sneered at everything. They kind of just sneered at everything because I was in that I was one of those kids who hated school. Or at least hated my classmates. So, so I kind of so there's a lot the girl, or like not hate, but like definitely didn't think highly of my classmates, or my peers. So in that regard, I definitely related to that at the time. I know Mo was all about Thora Birch, but I was more. But 14-year-old me immediately took to Scarlett Johansson. Look how that turned out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, both of them together are pretty appealing in their own way.
Right.
I think it's a Coke or Pepsi type situation there, man. I mean, I see Scarlett. She's got her qualities, just not. I'm more a Thora Birch dude. Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was a very funny. I thought it was a very good. I mean, at the time I thought it was really good, very funny. And then Terry Zwigoff, I agree with Dane, great director. Crumb is one of those movies that made me want to pursue a career in movies. And Bad Santa is a must-watch for me every Christmas. I didn't like Art School Confidential though.
Oh no.
Oh, I love Art School Confidential.
But I did get around to reading the comic book a few years ago, and actually I am in the middle of rereading it right now. The comic's pretty good. Actually, I do find myself, although watching it right now as an adult, I do find the character of Enid a lot more insufferable. Because I did go to a high school full of girls like Enid, so that definitely shaped my opinion of her. My adult opinion of her. Although I also find the character of Seymour. The older I get, the more I find the character of Seymour relatable.
Right.
For better or worse.
Well,
All right. How about you, Brandon?
Well, this is not my first time watching this. Matter of fact, I believe you were the one who originally introduced me to this film.
Probably.
I do agree with what Mo had said, is that it's one of those movies that you feel is more artistic and amazing when you watch it younger. And as I get older, I still feel it is a great film, but I see it differently. I think a lot of films really you really do see films differently depending on what age you are when you see them,
Oh yeah.
and what life experiences you've had as well. I mean, I can understand. I mean, the outcasts, and I identify with them quite well, especially when I first watched the film. Uh, Enid was definitely the one I had been I was attracted to more personality wise and wise more than I was Scarlett Johansson's
Mm.
character. But I considered her in that film as more of an eye candy character
Yeah.
than a than with Enid being the star in that set. Nowadays, Enid kind of annoys me a little bit more now as
Yeah.
an adult, but I identify more with her. Actually, it's kind of funny because I read the comic for the first time for this actual podcast, and it's kind of funny because uh, if you go by the comic, me and Enid are exactly the same age. So it's actually because she's born in '79, which she puts out in the comic.
Right.
And so unlike Scott Pilgrim, where I kind of had a sort of connection to that, I actually look at Ghost World as having a much closer connection generationally than to that. So I thought it was really good. I mean, I wouldn't have updated mine to the Criterion if I hadn't.
Mhm.
And I still enjoyed it thoroughly when I watched it. But I admit, the connection to the name Ghost World means a lot more to me now that I've seen the read the comic,
Yeah.
than it did when I just watched the movie. So, with that,
Right.
again, I thought it was great. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, though I do see it differently now than I did when I was in my early 20s watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for this one, definitely this was not my first rodeo, as they say. I have seen this one many times. I believe I was initially introduced to it by the critical reviews. I don't even know if I'd seen a preview. I think it was one of those ones that I heard about the critics raving about it, and I was like, oh, I got to see this. And I remember going to see it at the Grandin and then going back to see it at the Grandin and then going back to see it at the Bird. I am just about 100% certain, at least 98% certain, this was the first movie I saw 3 times in theaters. And
Really?
for a while after that, I had only done comic book movies. I saw Spider-Man and I think Spider-Man 2 3 times. I know I saw Iron Man 3 times. And then I think the only other ones I've hit that mark are ones that blew past it due to happenstance, not personal choice. I make that clear. Revenge of the Sith is on that list. 4 times. I saw Juno 7 and Dark Knight 8. So those are the only ones that I've gone past 3 that I can think of. And this was the first. And it was because I fell instantly and madly in love with this movie. I adored it. Absolutely. I loved the music. I loved the creativity of it. I loved the snappy dialogue. I related to the outcasts. I was hot for both Thora Birch and Scarlett Johansson. They were both smoking hot in my mind at that time, partly because I was still a huge fan of American Beauty, so Thora Birch, and I was becoming familiar with Scarlett Johansson. I believe this film came out 2 months before The Man Who Wasn't There, I think.
It predated Lost in Translation by a couple years.
It did predate Lost in Translation. I'd already seen a half dozen of her films by the time Lost in Translation came out. And yes, I was there for that movie in the theater. That's one we'll have to cover one day. But
well, don't forget about Eight-Legged Freaks.
Well, that was a little.
Oh yeah, her best movie ever.
Well, that was one of her follow-ups. I think that was her follow-up to The Man Who Wasn't There. But like one of her first movies, Manny and Lowe, a little known movie that's quite good that I've still got somewhere. And Just Cause is not as good, but that was an early one. But anyway, point is, everything about this film, I loved it. I think I got the DVD not long after it came out on DVD. I actually have a physical copy. This is actually appropriate because this movie has such a through line of rare music in the collection and whatever. I actually own the only copy I have ever personally seen of the soundtrack. I don't know that is all that rare. I've just never seen it. So I picked it up at a superstore in Atlanta. That it was like a media superstore or something. And the Ghost World theme by David Catay is one of my most played pieces of movie music ever. I still say the man was robbed by the music branch of the Academy. The score in this film is just incredible. So everything about it, I have never fully considered this a 10-star movie, but I flirted with that for a long time. But that being said, this has been a minute since I've seen it. And in the meantime, I had seen Bad Santa and enjoyed it, but not as much. I saw Art School Confidential and said, oh my God, that movie's depressing. And Brandon showed me Crumb, which apparently he didn't really get into it, but that's apparently a huge part of his
Yep.
I've seen that a lot.
And,
lot.
I love Crumb. I actually in college I actually made a we had to for one of my classes, I want to say it was like a documentary class or something. Right. We had to make our own trailers for a documentary film, and I made mine on Crumb, and I'm pretty proud of how that trailer turned out. I should send the link to everybody in the chat.
Right. And then, of course, in the meantime, I also saw a movie where Crumb was a character, American Splendor, which was a pretty good one. So now I understand that Crumb and Zwigoff were in a band together, and actually the record that Enid picks up and said, "Is this any good?" and Seymour's like, "Nah." That was apparently their band. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I want to hear that now. But it's been a minute since I've revisited this, and in the meantime, I did finally read the comic 2 years ago, maybe. It kind of like with Scott Pilgrim. I found it at the library and said, it's time I read this. And kind of like Scott Pilgrim, I was kind of let down when I actually read the comic. Mm-hmm. And then going back to the movie, kind of like with Scott Pilgrim, I was like, I related more to this when it came out. I definitely appreciate that viewpoint that several people have expressed, and there is a lot of truth to it. When it came out, I fully related to Enid and to a degree to Becky. And I kind of related to Seymour, but I was more like afraid of I didn't really want to as much as I kind of knew I did. Mm-hmm. But with each passing year, I have to admit it, I very much related to Seymour this time.
Exactly.
And I found Becky insufferable. If it was anyone but Scarlett Johansson, I probably would have been ticked off by her character. I actually did not feel that way. I actually still very much related to Enid. Maybe less so than before, but I still very much relate to her because really when it comes down to it, the beating heart of this movie is her desperate search for where do I go in life? She has no freaking clue
and she never
where she needs to go. What's that?
Well, that's kind of
right. What's up?
Well, that's kind of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying she never figures it out either.
She doesn't, but she does make a choice at the end, which is nice, And And one thing as well that I thought about a lot this time watching it, and someone brought up the point of how important your age can be when you're watching a movie or how much you've lived or whatever. A movie that has a lot in relationship to this, right down to Leaving on a Bus, is The Graduate. And that was a movie that my dad tried to introduce to me when I was in high school, and I friggin' hated it. Hated it. And then I came back in college because everyone was saying what a great film The Graduate was. And I came back to it and I was like, it is kind of a great film. But I wasn't ready for it in high school. You know?
A lot of movies are like that. They have to hit you at certain times.
Exactly. And
I do still relate to, well, both girls, but I think Enid more than Becky. You know, I relate to them both insofar as like that's definitely how I was. Like I had many chips on my shoulder, like high school and college, and like I still do relate to that kind of feeling like the people in your life are just idiots and they're beneath you, and
right.
that you don't want anything to do with them, but you also realize that you do that so much to so many people, then you're going to be left with nothing. And so what do you do with that nothing? Do you just try to carve out meaning in a place that doesn't really seem to afford it? Do you leave? What do you do? And because it is a very self-isolating existence, but at the same time, I mean, they are surrounded by some really insufferable idiotic people that are very shallow and just infuriating in their own right. So I mean, I totally sympathize, but I also know that it is a lonely path to walk, and I think that's the choice that Becky makes, is that she realizes it's okay to work at a store, and it's okay to kind of chart my own more mainstream path, and I don't have to have as many chips on my shoulder anymore. And it's one of those things where on the one hand, I guess you could say that she's kind of selling out, but also she, on the other hand, is realizing, I don't have to be doing kind of me against the world about everything. And I think a lot of people, they tend to have to make that choice of, are they going to keep fighting the good fight, as lonely and quixotic as it's going to be, or are they going to make some choices and, settle down in some form or fashion.
Right. And so this film, it really is more, the film has a plot. It definitely has a plot. But whereas the last one we talked about, The Demon Knight, was a little bit more of a kind of careened from plot point to plot point with a fair bit of character development, but really it was more about what was actually happening, really. This one is almost more about what doesn't happen. Like, I think one of the best performances in the film, and I think I want to lead this as more of a character discussion, at least starting out. But I'm just going to go ahead and throw out there one of the unsung heroes in this film is Bob Balaban as Enid's dad. He's a great character actor. He really is. But he can't put a full sentence together. He's so afraid of the world. He's very shy, very, and I think he does a beautiful job doing that. But, like, not all the characters in this are over the top. A lot of them are very human, and you can relate to them, but you also just, you kind of pity him too. You're like, that guy needs a hug.
Well, that's kind of the great genius about Terry Zwigoff films in general, is that they have a lot of characters that are really weird in their own respect, but they're also very pitiable and sympathetic, but they're also quite pathetic. And you're like, geez, you really, man, you are one pathetic loser. That's what you hear in your head. It's all those things all at the same time, and I think in a lot of ways that's kind of the human condition. That people, their best laid plans often go awry, and they can look pretty ridiculous in the process.
Okay, so we've heard some. I'll go ahead and just kick off, just briefly. The kickoff of this is the graduation. The girls are graduating. They're leaving high school, and you get some little bits. Enid finds out she has to take art class over the summer because just because they failed you, and then Becky's like, "You loser," But yeah, she has to take a remedial art class. And we'll get to that when we get to that character. That's a interesting character. But you get this thing. One of the cool things about the soundtrack was Terry Zwigoff wrote the liner notes, and he is an old school music aficionado. He based a lot of Seymour on himself, and he is a hardcore aficionado of that old school music, like the really old-timey ragtime blues, that kind of stuff. And he hates most modern music. The film has a surprising amount of modern music on the soundtrack, but a lot of it is used specifically to call out modern music. And the soundtrack actually includes that atrocious rap song that they tried to do at the graduation. And it also includes that song by Blues Hammer that I always thought was not bad, but this time around I was like, oh my god, it is bad.
Because it is so fucking obnoxious, dude. I was rolling during that scene this time. I kind of forgot about how brilliant that shit was.
But yeah, he points that out on the liner notes. He talks about how so much of the modern world is soulless, and he kind of gets into the origin of the word ghost world in the liner notes to that album. But yeah, that gave me my first look into Zwigoff's viewpoint on this, and he just some of his attacks on modern society are pretty merciless.
Actually, though, that rap thing is not unusual. Anybody who went to high school in the 90s should know that everybody thought it was cool to have a rap song.
It wasn't at all really out of place. No. That was part of the point.
It was too on point.
Yeah. And then the whole thing of the girl who got in an accident because she was drinking, and now everyone loves her because she's in a wheelchair. And I know
she's swearing off all the drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. Right. What's up? Dave, you're trying to say something?
She's the most popular girl at the popular table.
Pretty much, yeah. And then that dance. And there was that great line that where they were Becky was something like, oh, this is so bad, it's great. And Enid's like, this is so bad, it's gone past great, back to bad again. It's like, yeah, I always thought that was an interesting way of putting it. But it kind of reminded me of some of the movies we watched.
It occasionally happens.
But actually, I think the two of them probably would appreciate a group like this, because we seem to like those weird, kitschy things, like you guys both having that nunchucka dude as your icons.
He's really, dude, he's the lesson of the movie to me, because he's already got it figured out, man. He's found his zen happy place. And that's just eating beef jerkies down at the corner store.
Eating beef jerky, having a floaty, not bothering.
Doing some chucking. That's what it's all about, man. Short shorts and a longer mullet. That's what I'm talking about.
I think his mullet is longer than his shorts. Oh, geez. But anyway, so I guess, I guess we've kind of hit on a couple of the big characters. We can come back to them if we want to, but I guess we should probably start with Enid. We've gotten everyone's kind of initial ideas, but so like I said, basically, so you got this girl who's really desperately trying to find herself. She doesn't know what the hell she wants. She is artistic. She keeps a journal of a very nice journal. And apparently that was Sophia Crumb, Robert Crumb's daughter, who did the illustrations for that. So that was kind of cool. Yeah, apparently Daniel Clowes was like, it needs to be a female,
a teenage girl.
It needs to be a girl doing those drawings and not me. And so that was a nice touch, I thought. Apparently, Robert Crumb himself contributed that painting for the one that got everyone in hot water.
Oh, the chicken one?
Yeah.
Actually, Robert Crumb is one of those I'm surprised that has so far escaped the cancel culture.
Yeah.
I feel like he's kind of... I kind of feel like in general... I mean, I think it's the reason why he's escaped is because a lot of his work just in general hasn't really... doesn't really have as much relevance now.
He swims. I was gonna say he swims very under the radar and kind of always has.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's doubtful he would give a fuck if they tried to cancel him. So
I don't think he would.
You know,
I guess not that his work is irrelevant. It's just he's very underground. He's a little too underground for he's too underground that the mainstream doesn't care.
Right. Like if he was a big star, I think there'd be a bigger outcry on that sort of thing.
But I remember a lot of his artwork was they showed a lot of his more racist pieces.
Right. Like if he on last night's discussion, if Crumb had written a series of children's books, there might be.
Oh God!
I
can only imagine.
I think he did. It was called Fritz the Cat.
Actually, though, I do not think that modern society. I do not think that most of modern society can understand Crumb at all. Which is a sad thing. I mean, I really do feel like most of society has lost its ability to reason beyond the concrete. I feel like it's all about the what do they call it? It's all. I mean, abstract thought is gone.
The most simplistic, surface level interpretations of things.
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay. So the guy that plays Nunchaku Dude is in Sky Sharks, apparently.
Well,
he's also a scary movie.
Yeah, no, he's had a few interesting roles. Most of these people have had some really great overall filmographies. But anyway, so again, does anyone have more that we've kind of hit from several angles, but does anyone have more they really want to chip in about Enid and what they think on her role here?
Looking at Enid, I mean, this is like in between her child role and her role in Dungeons and Dragons, which I did more.
I never did see that.
I actually did.
Oh, you're better off.
I actually did like the Dungeons and Dragons movie. So
you just gotta look at it as like
didn't.
Yeah, it's not a good D&D movie, but as like a fun piece of fantasy schlock, it's a good time.
But in any case, I thought that Enid, from a somewhat gothic look,
punk, I would say.
I liked the way that she looked. It's not that she wasn't pretty or anything like that. That she would have been like the kind of chick that I would have maybe possibly gone out with in high school. But then again, the way that she was acting, I think she would have turned me down. So
I'd have worn her down with just being around. Like those girls want someone to fucking hate on sometimes. So it's eventually they warm up to you, even if you can't quite tell. I did date chicks a lot like that, and the look definitely, like I said, informed. It did things for a young Mo. Okay, those boots can walk all over me anytime they want to.
Right.
No bones about it.
One of the cool things about her lack of identity which I kind of said on the message earlier, and I was not joking. I was quite serious. They Oscars missed a glorious opportunity to nominate this for costume design, partly because she's almost always wearing something very different. She's always in a very different look, and it's very intriguing that they did that.
I think it should have definitely gotten something for costume design. I did love the colors
Right.
that she kept wearing.
Yeah, the color.
Enid strikes.
Good.
Enid and Becky both strike me as girls that I probably would have at least been friends with, in a younger age, and now, at least would have been friends with. I honestly doubt that either one of them would have been remotely interested in me, because like tends to not attract like in a romantic way, and honestly, neither one of them would really be all that romantically interesting to me, just because I see too much of myself in them.
Yeah, you don't want to hook up with yourself. That'd be weird. Everyone's asked themselves the question at some point, like, would I bang me?
So,
and we're not all Buffalo Bill,
When I look at it, a lot of Generation X and early millennials are considered a lost generation in many ways.
The baby boomers sure think so.
Well, I mean, you think about it. It's the one generation. I mean, the millennial generation has its take as well on society, but the Gen Xers were the group of the generation that never fit in any way, shape, or form. We didn't have our thing. We weren't offended by everything, as Gen Z, I guess, is their claim to fame. We did not have the whole, we weren't totally destroyed by the boomer generation as the millennial generation. We were just kind of the aimless generation. And even at the end of that, and I bear more resemblance to early millennials than I do Gen Xers, because I was born in that last year. But a lot of that generation, it was aimless, and you can see that in Enid and Becky and their characters. Right. Both of them are aimless. We don't, none of us know what to do in life, and that's something that was identified, especially when it came to those years. I mean,
the challenges that millennials face, are more kind of socioeconomic in nature, as far as like feeling like we can't really rise above a certain threshold because of the baby boomers having, had kind of a free ride on a lot of things that we don't, and we're achieving a lot of milestones later than they did, and they're thinking, oh, it's because we're lazy or whatever. No, it's because there are a lot of barriers in our way and that kind of stuff. But but you're right. Generation X was kind of defined by feeling like, because they were right smack in the middle of like relative peacetime. And I say relative because there was still a Cold War and that kind of stuff, but like it wasn't like they were the generation who went off to Vietnam necessarily, things like that. Like say a lot of the baby boomers, they were kind of defined by that in a way that Gen X was not, and so they were like a lot of movies that deal with Gen X or filmmakers that are of that Gen X generation. I've noticed a lot of them tend to. I mean, there's a reason why someone like Tarantino or Kevin Smith or whatever, they are definitely of that generation, because so much of it is very reflective of television and of popular culture. It's very kind of insular in a very specific way.
It's a lost generation a lot of the times. I think that's also why the generation tends to be ignored a lot when it comes to a lot of the infighting, because a lot of Gen Xers didn't quite have the challenges that millennials had, but they also didn't quite have the advantages or the social fights that boomers had. Most don't have the social challenges and uniqueness that Gen Z has with with a lot of this.
Yeah.
I mean, Gen Z actually bears more similarity to the Boomer generation than it does to any of the others.
Apparently
Right.
so. I mean, that they say that generations do kind of tend to be cyclical in nature, and I could see that. And we'll have to see exactly what becomes of Generation Z and what becomes of the millennials, because our story, the millennial story, is still being written, and I don't think that millennials are. I think that any kind of beefs that we have with the world tend to be more justified than the baby boomers tend to say. And the baby boomers are aging very, very disgracefully, I have to say. I mean, they already had a reputation for being very self-indulgent even when they were young, and it just seems like they're aging very disgracefully. Not all of them, but on a kind of stereotypical level,
Right.
But it's such that when you see a movie like this, teenagers in general are very confused about the world and stuff, and I'm sure that when you're dealing with Gen Xers that it's very exacerbated.
Well, again, we're kind of the ignored generation, but at the same time, it is kind of funny how Gen Z is the ones who call both Gen Xers and millennials boomers. So it's kind of funny in that sense.
I was like, Gen Z, they say we millennials have like no fashion sense, or we're too obsessed with Harry Potter. But I'm just gonna say right now, tell them right now that someday you'll be 30 and lame too.
Exactly.
Right.
It is inevitable.
Or 40 and tired.
Well, and actually, that's like one of the things that really starts putting the wedge a little bit between Enid and Becky is when they meet Seymour, like actually meet him. Becky can't get over the whole idea that, oh, this guy's just a loser. But Enid is somehow fascinated by him. Like, at one point she says something like, he's such a clueless dork, he's almost kind of cool, something like
Exactly.
that. And it's kind of like she, I guess, senses a kindred spirit, even though she doesn't quite know how to put it in words. Whereas, so...
Well, that was kind of my vibe on both of them. Was like Enid seems like she sneers at everything, and talks shit, but she finds things stupid in more of a whimsical, fun kind of a way. Whereas, Scarlett's character, what's her name, Becca?
Becky. Yeah.
Becky, she just hates everything. Yet,
pretty much.
On the flip side, she's forcing herself to grow up. Which also kind of goes along with hating everything, I feel like, because everybody I know who did that became miserable for the most part.
This is one of the things This is one thing that I did relate with that probably frustrates a lot of people with Enid, but I relate to it. And that was her own attempts to enter the workforce, such as they were. I would never be the way she is with customers, but I relate to her
unwillingness. We've all thought about it, though. We've all thought about it.
We've all thought about how cool it would be to be Randall for a day. I mean, it's but she's not as malicious about it as Randall is. That would be more Becky's speed. I see Becky, if she stays at the coffee shop for another couple of years, kind of becoming Randall. But here there was more like, she did the comment to the guy, like, I wish we sold beer, like, you wish after 10 minutes of this film. And then, mocking the woman for the delicious yellow chemical sludge, But, and then I like but the part where the conversation she has where the guy comes on, what the hell is wrong with you? What? I was just joking around. It's my shtick. Well, lose it. And why aren't you pushing the larger sizes? Didn't you get training about upsizing? Yeah, but I feel really weird. It's pretty sleazy. And she seems a little like, but I relate to that. As an employee, I have never been comfortable doing things that I don't agree with. Like, I don't mean like I don't want to do this, like that I deep down think are pretty sleazy. I don't like doing that. So I relate to someone who's willing to take a stand for that. And then of course the guy comes up, "Hey, can I get a medium 7-Up?" Medium? Why, sir, do you not know that for a mere 25 cents more, you can purchase a large beverage? And, I'm only telling you this because we're such good friends. Medium is really only for suckers who don't know the concept of value.
Yeah, that was great.
It's like, I wish I could do that. I really do.
Sadly, in this day and age, it is my only takeaway from that is I miss being able to go to a theater.
Yeah, I miss that too. Especially because that looked like probably a pretty good one. I mean, it was a big theater at least.
My theater experiences have been pleasant entirely, so I really don't.
But then I think back to my experience actually working in movie theater where I had to deal with people like Becky, and I was like, I don't miss that. But the
popcorn, Jesus Christ!
Right. But the next, the other part that I want to talk about, I guess, we probably should also talk a little bit more on Becky. We've touched on her a lot, and I've been a little harsh on her but partly it's because the first part of the film, the two of them really are snide. They're always making sharp, cutting remarks at other people. They're doing despicable things.
Yes.
And I didn't really feel quite as bad on that when I was younger, but now I'm looking at it like for me, this is kind of weird. One of my personal triggers in a movie is people violating other people's space and privacy. I don't know why, but that really bugs me. And so the two of them, when they were rifling through the mailboxes, it was like, that sort of thing. And then, of course, the way they would follow people. And I guess the fact that Enid was repentant after a while, but Becky really wasn't, might have been why I was more harsh on her this time around. But yeah, early on, it's hard to really like either one of them. My interest level didn't take as big of a nosedive as was Scott Pilgrim, but it's a similar thing.
Though, this is one of the major differences between this and the comics. Yeah. And of course, I'd never read the comics, and of course, the comics. I don't remember, when did this film come out again?
2001.
Yeah, so of course, the comics came out in the 90s.
Right.
And I look at this and these characters, and that's the thing. This had a plot. The comics never moved beyond the two of them being the outsiders, chiding everybody else in society because they felt like they were above that. And but that's not just that. I mean, that was that case. I mean, shoot. What was that one? The Beavis and Butthead character that came from that.
Oh, Daria.
I definitely saw
Daria.
Yeah.
Daria was a good pair, but that's this is such a '90s thing. It's a '90s concept.
Right. The another thing with the comic, from what I remember and from what I understand, was Becky had a much bigger role in the comic. Partly because Seymour had a much smaller role.
He just can't. They pulled the trick on him, and then that was the end of it. That was all he was.
Right.
They didn't have really a plot. It was just them basically making fun of these weird things in society. Basically, we're freaks, but we're going to also laugh at the other freaks and craziness of society.
Right. And probably
there were a lot of films and TV shows and stuff like that in the 90s about characters that were kind of going nowhere and were aware enough about their own station in life to, be aware of the fact that they were going nowhere, but they weren't really willing or able to get somewhere. Like I'm thinking of like Beavis and Butthead. Well, they were more blissfully unaware because they were just a bunch of idiotic, metalhead teens.
Right.
But like, similar setup. But then I'm thinking like Clerks is a big one.
Reality Bites.
Reality Bites.
Right.
There were a lot of movies in that decade that were made by Gen Xers that were feeling like they were going nowhere, etc. And so that was a very common feature of that period of fiction storytelling.
Right, definitely. And the and then again with this one, you've got again the one that kind of she at least knows what's expected of her, and she doesn't really want to do it, but she kind of feels like, okay, I gotta do it. And the other one is just like, actually, and this will lead me into one of the biggest freaks in the movie, of course, is Ileana Douglas's character, the art teacher.
Oh, God.
That is the, whatever the hell her name is.
Well,
and then I love
her in Stir of Echoes.
Right,
Yep.
Roberta Ellsworth. I loved the way they start with this uber pretentious short film. Incredibly pretentious, where they keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. And she stops it and she's like, that is called Mirror, Father, Mirror. And I'm like, oh, we wouldn't have guessed that. But then but one of my favorite lines in the movie, I think, is when she's like, I always show that to everyone meeting for the first time because I feel like it says so much about me.
Yeah, and it's just wow. Yeah.
I'm like, and yes, it does. It says a lot about her. But she is essentially the worst possible art teacher.
Yes.
In part because she is
a very narrow definition of art.
Yes, she is incredibly pretentious.
And she's got favoritism.
Yes.
She has, oh God, she has favoritism. Yes. What was the girl's name that she just adored?
That girl was such a brown nose. She was a really
yes. That was her name, Brown Noser. We'll go with that. Margaret.
I
Margaret.
have American
And then-
Beauty flashbacks with that. With the
there was a lot of. There were a lot of great, if anyone remembers another masterpiece of the comic medium, Calvin and Hobbes, they had a lot of, Bill Watterson did a lot of really great critiques of the art world and art theory and that kind of stuff. And the line that stuck out to me, which is applicable to this art teacher, is a line that Calvin has, which is a good artist statement says more than his art ever does. And that's kind of the vibe that I get from this teacher.
I get her. I think like the critic, only worse. Like she would be someone that would probably think he's a populist. But
actually,
I love but like one of my favorite. I wouldn't say favorite, but like I think one of the parts of the movie that was most affecting for me this time around, I think it always got me, but like one of the parts where my heart really went out to Enid was the part where she brings in her journal and gives it in as an assignment. And the teacher had just finished mocking this kid Philip's drawing, which granted it was a terrible drawing. And
it was fan art.
It was fan art of a video game. Yeah, it really was. And it wasn't that great. But whatever the case, she was still dumping on him in a way you really shouldn't dump on a student. And then Enid brings in her journal. Like, you don't get any more personal than that.
Yeah.
And she flips through it and she's like, colorful. And she's like, so class, we can learn something here. Art can be like, an artist can make like these cartoons, which are amusing, or they can do something that really has meaning and whatever. And then you just see Enid like completely deflate and just like, and that was a great acting on Thora Birch's part. But then she goes to that little coat hanger thing that Brown Noser is her official name. And I'll admit, like, yeah, I can see how that could be seen as an important work. I could admit that. But it's just that, to me, it triggered me a little bit because this is my ongoing debate that, well, we've had a little bit with you, Dave, but but I've had with a lot of people about the importance of animation and comics in general.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a huge booster for animation and comics, but a lot of people do just dismiss them out of hand. And this teacher was like taking it to the nth degree, but I saw it and I was like, that.
Well, actually, she's the kind of teacher who would have gotten along very well with the guy in American Beauty. She would have seen that whole thing with the plastic bag through the air, and she would have been talking about it like, this is the perfect piece, which, by the way, I consider American Beauty the kind of pretentious art that she would love and dismiss other types of art with. So, yes, I would actually relate on that.
Oh, and actually, you just reminded me, though, there's that other great scene in the movie where the guy's at the video store looking for 8.5, and the clerk has no clue what he's talking about.
Oh my God, that would have driven me crazy. That's why I didn't like renting movies from Blockbuster.
Yeah. Here we have it's 9.5 Weeks with Mickey Rourke. It's in the erotic drama section. No, the Fellini film. But then you also, that teacher, though, she had another moment too later on where she again trashes Enid, and then she moves on. She's like, well, this looks like a fill-up piece. You know, it's like, wow. Yeah, I mean, again, it didn't look like that kid really needed to be in art class. He clearly wasn't an artist, but that's not a way to treat your students. Well,
this is like that leftover art class in the summer. Right. Most of the people failed, or like Enid, just kind of skipped out on it, you know?
Right. Kind of makes you wonder why
that one kid's art project at the end. Like, there's a reason this chick is teaching remedial art in the goddamn summertime, you know?
Right.
Not like the main art class or something.
Right.
I love that part. Like, she goes to give him a hug and just trashes this whole sculpture that he's
And then she's like, I hope you all took something from my class. And he's like trying to put it back together, and he gives her a death stare and tosses it.
Yeah, it's great.
But it's, and then the whole thing where she basically torpedoed Enid's college career because her stupid mistake. You know, that's like, yeah, that was not a good thing there. But does anyone have any more
cancel culture?
So that was seen was cancel culture in action, no doubt about it.
It really was.
So for you kiddies at home, the scene we're talking about is where Enid takes a poster drawn by Mr. Robert Crumb that was apparently advertising material for Cook's Chicken back in the day when it went by a different name. And she finds it in... What's up?
This is actually very similar to the concept we discussed yesterday, which, by the way, if you go to Septum Sen versus the World, you'll see a nice discussion on cancel culture. But this is not that different from, say, Dr. Seuss and today's concept is the business said this probably Coon's Chicken doesn't seem to be getting as many customers as it used to. So maybe we should change it out a little bit. Now, many might be upset that they changed it from Coon's Chicken to there because, you know, it's, you know, obviously not racist in the least, obviously. But, you know, it's still, so, I mean, I think it's actually very similar to today's concept. So I kind of thought it was funny how it could be very well related.
Now, I'd be curious to know what the real Cook's Chicken thought of this movie, because it's like, apparently, from what I understand, Coon Chicken, it was a real company.
Real chain
but
in Utah.
Yeah. but they closed, and this Cooks was a whole different entity supposedly. So it's interesting that they merged them together in the movie. But yeah, she finds it at Seymour's apartment, and he has a whole binder of this stuff. And he said that when he was her age, he was fascinated by the whole backstory, and he kind of took it home and forgot that it was there. And of course, she ends up getting him in hot water for using that as a, quote, found art piece, which
Yes.
honestly, the girl who did the tampon in the teacup, that I can see as a found art piece because she did take pieces and arrange them. I'm not sure taking a poster and like mounting it counts as a found art. I really
lazy art.
Well, it goes back to what
loved it. The teacher just loved it.
she laughed it up because it goes back to what
Yes.
Dane was talking about with Calvin and Hobbes, which is like,
Right.
oh, a good artist's statement says more than the art ever
Right.
does, or whatever.
Right.
And so she was more interested in what she had to say about it.
And
it
even
won her
though
over.
Enid clearly was pulling it out of her ass on the spot, like she hadn't even really thought about the statement, but she just kind of made it up on the spot. It was what the teacher wanted to hear, and it was
It worked a little too good.
yeah. But yeah. Anyone have any more thoughts on any of those? Either the teacher or I guess Enid or Becky or
Well, I mean, the two characters of Becky and Enid are very similar. Like I said earlier,
Yeah.
it kind of really boils down to like, Becky's trying to grow up and
Mhm.
do what's expected of her, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And also the way that she is kind of snarky is in a
Mhm.
different way than to the way Enid is. Enid takes more enjoyment. She's more whimsically weird, whereas Becky's character is more legitimately miserable. you
Right.
know? And for me, most of the movie is, Enid trying to also do what she thinks is expected of her. Like even this art class thing, or art college or whatever,
Mhm.
seems like the way that she should be going based on who she is, But then the way she's treated in this art class probably mirrors in a lot of ways how she very well could have been treated at like a mainstream art college at the time,
Right.
So it's like they both grow up in different ways, and I kind of do disagree with the sentiment that she didn't find herself along the way in some way, because I kind of take the ending, which I'm sure we'll get to, as her like going out into the world to find a place where she could be weird and make it work, whereas the other girl was going in the direction of I could still be weird or whatever, but that's more of like a hobby from our childhood. I gotta like be a normal adult now or whatever.
Right.
I find that whole idea of the movie very interesting.
Now, both comic and movie do end the same way, but I do find it interesting that the college thing did occur in both. But but it's one of those occurrences where I did find the comic book more entertaining because part of it was that she needed to learn to drive. So the car she decides to purchase is hers.
That's
And
good.
that just,
How could they leave that
right
out?
there.
Yeah, how'd they
that right
do
there
that?
was hilarious. And of course, she doesn't make it into college there either, but it was
Right.
because she failed her entrance exams instead of actually what happened to her here. But still, it's that same concept. And I don't know. I just something about her driving around in the hearse.
That
I
would have
wish
been
they
lovely.
kept that in the film. That would have been funny as hell.
Yeah. That is pretty good. Yeah. Of course, the other major player who, as we said, is a little different from the comics, Seymour, of course, the Steve Buscemi character, first comes into the scene early on where Enid and Becky find his, I think they call it, what do they call it? A misconnections sort of deal.
Yeah, misconnection.
Like, where he writes to this woman that he had met in an airport, I believe it was, and they had a moment. and Enid and Becky just are beside themselves with glee because of this. And Becky's like, we need to call him. Totally, yes, we need to. So they set up this false date with this guy that they've never met before. It really is one of the cruelest things they do in the whole movie.
And I like that Brad Renfro.
Right.
Renfro, he tells him, like, that's a pretty, you know, he's almost sort of like a Jiminy Cricket in a weird way at the beginning.
Like,
and so we should mention Brad Renfro as their friend-ish Josh.
Yes.
You're right. He kind of is a Jiminy Cricket role in some ways.
Because even when they're in the store being annoying, he's kind of giving off, even in like a silent way, kind of like that. Should you really be doing this?
Right.
And they do give
vibe.
And they do give Enid a little bit more. I do feel like they give her a little bit more humanity in there, that she actually does give a connection to him. I love what they did in the movie, actually giving it a plot,
right?
Actually having them make that connection with him, right. Especially Enid. I feel like it made the character much more relatable than she is in the comics.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, because in the comics they just watch him do it and then leave and they laugh about it, and that's it. Yeah. That's all you know.
Do they follow him then? I don't remember.
Nope, they follow the Satanists, but they don't.
So basically, in this one, they basically force Josh to follow him home, and then they find out that he's kind of in the neighborhood. So a few days later, they go back around and they're running a garage sale out of the bottom of the building, and they meet his roommate, who's played by Tom McGowan, who I will always remember as Kenny from Frasier. Mm-hmm. But they see a record and they're like, "Is you have any more records? Oh, you will need to talk to Seymour." And they have this look of like, Seymour, like that's his name. But then as they're talking, Becky's openly mocking him, but Enid is feigning interest. And she kind of gets a little bit, I think, actual interest, but more feigning. She tries to be nice and buys a record that he recommends. That's where we see that throwaway gag about the other record. And then eventually, one night, she's just really upset, and her regular stick isn't doing it for her. So she sees that record and pops it in. And this one song that is on the soundtrack by Skip James called "Devil Got My Woman." Really good song, but that comes on and she just is hooked. She plays it over and over and over again, and through music, basically, she's like, maybe this guy's not so bad after all. So she goes back and asks for more records, and he's like, "Oh, there are no more records like that," But they have these music discussions, and she just kind of becomes fixated on Seymour to Becky's extreme annoyance. And meanwhile, you just meet, they spend all this time together. You see more and more of Seymour's life, which is, he's not unsuccessful. He's technically successful in the conventional sense. He's like a high-placed corporate job, or upper middle management, I guess.
Yeah.
But he's like absolute, and he gets to collect. I think we could all relate to that. His like he had that one line, like, "I'm trying to cut it down to the essentials, around 1,500 songs." It's like I bet we can all relate to that.
Yes, we can.
But he's really miserable. Like absolutely miserable, and she actually takes it in her. She becomes obsessed with trying to make him happy. She figures if she can hook him up with someone, maybe that'll make him happy. And so overall, what's everyone's basic impression on Seymour?
He's probably one of my favorite characters that Steve Buscemi has played. Because, one, he's not a character that is the butt of a joke necessarily. He is, but he isn't. Right. And he's not a character that is being beaten up for the amusement of the Coen brothers, which I do like that
or
as
Adam
well.
Sandler.
Or Adam Sandler. So, you know, I do feel like this character takes on a depth of his own and shows a lot of the skill that he has in acting. I really do like the character. And yes, it's kind of a character that we all kind of might have a slight trepidation with, identifying with, but still.
He's the one I most identify with, especially as a collector and as someone who collects. And,
and you know, for the keen eye, he had some horror magazines framed in his little collection room, and some straight up like detective murder mystery stuff on the wall. So he probably had some dope movies too. Sorry, Dave.
He had an awesome collector room. He did. I agree with Mo. Awesome collector room.
And apparently his room was largely modeled on Zwigoff's own digs, apparently. Because like I said, you know, that whole obsession with old-timey music was very much drawn from his interest.
Yeah, I definitely go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, but yeah, I definitely related to, like, you know, him being a collector as well as being someone who tends to struggle with finding that special someone.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, Dave, I cut you off there for a minute, bud.
I'd cut into Brandon's take on it too. So, I also relate to that middle-aged struggle of finding love, because before I met Tammy, I was going through some of the same things, and then just happened to meet her at the right time and the right place. So, knowing that he went through life as a collector, and it seemed like he was a very lonely individual, you know, and when you have that initial date scene when she goes and gets some chick at the bar and go over there, and he's like all having an intellectual conversation, and she's like, yeah.
If you like blues,
Hammer.
And the guy that was playing was great. And I can relate to that, because I've been to shows where phenomenal people got drowned out by rude people. And I just, it's so depressing. And so I could.
I liked both of them, so I can't.
Yeah.
But what's funny with Seymour and Enid both is that in their own weird ways, like them kind of having that connection at that particular point in their respective lives makes a lot of sense, because they're both kind of directionless, but for totally different reasons. And you know, I know how it feels from Enid's side, as far as, like, you know, I think for me it was not so much the directionless part, because I've dealt more with, like, feeling like I haven't gotten where I've wanted to be, you know, fast enough. Like, that's been more my struggle rather than I don't know where I'm going. But, you know, I shared the feelings of contempt, you know, and still do, you know, quite a lot. So I share that part of it. I really hope as I age that I do not turn into someone like Seymour in terms of, like, my status, my station in life, you know, because even though I do agree, I like that he collects a lot of interesting offbeat things, and I certainly have tried to, you know, when that is all that you have really in your life, then, you know, your things end up owning you. And you know, I learned that the hard way actually before 2020, you know, 2019, actually, having had to sell so much and getting a lot of it, you know, back in cooler, better forms and all that stuff. It's like, you know, you do have to take a step back and you realize that, you know, it is just stuff at the end of the day. And it's like, you need greater things in your life to fulfill you. So it's like, I really hope that, you know, by the time that I reach that age, that I'm not, you know, still feeling that directionless or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. I don't want to live my life before I've lived it, but it's also like, you know, it's just, I look at that kind of thing, you know, as a good cautionary tale, just because it's like I want to always make sure that I'm at least striving for what I really want to do with my life.
Right,
But
it
also-
definitely is. It's all, and the older I get, the more horrifying it seems to be in that potentially that position. But it's direction, needing direction, feeling direction is one thing, but also just I fully appreciate both his, to a degree, Enid's, but she's still young. She's naive. She hasn't gotten a chance to be. Seymour has gotten a chance to be kind of bitter and to kind of lose some of his hopefulness. There's a little bit of a Charlie Brown to him, but he's he has the. At one point, he and his putative girlfriend are talking about Laurel and Hardy movies. That's probably part of the collection he has. And she's like, well, why is the fat one always so mean to the skinny one? And he's just looks at her like, you don't even know which one's which. But like, I could also see, they don't say it explicitly, but I could definitely see Seymour also being big on the Marx Brothers. And one line that I frequently remember that Groucho had, that I could see this relating to Seymour very much. I could see Enid very much relating to this, maybe Becky. But that one line that Groucho had that said, I would never want to be part of a club that would have me as a member.
One Woody Allen utilizes a lot himself. But one thing also from another film by the same director, Crumb, where Crumb actually points out, I've seen Crumb, unfortunately, more than I would like to think. But to the point where he's got, he's talking to the girl, and the girl is like saying these things like she hates the Three Stooges, and and Crumb's pointing out, like, you can see he's sad because he's the kind of guy who actually likes the Three Stooges, and that's the kind of thing. I swear that's exactly where they took that from when they did that.
Right. So, Dave, you're trying to say something? I'm sorry.
I forget. My take on this film is, to me, like, the characters were relatable maybe at the time that this came out. And I, like I said, I relate to Seymour a lot, especially like maybe 13 or 14 years ago. But if I thought of my life without Tammy, I would exactly be where Seymour is.
Hey, you just remember, Dave, if it ever doesn't work out, you've always got me, baby.
Yeah, but then I start thinking about you as Billy, and then things. and then I'm like the girl in the pit where he's like, it puts the lotion on.
A whole different sort of social misanthrope there.
Still a coming of age film of sorts, though.
Okay, yeah. So we've covered a good chunk of the characters. We haven't really talked about Doug, but I guess there's not much to say other than...
What about the guy waiting for the bus?
Well, there is the guy waiting for the bus, yes.
He's the real ghost in the whole thing. He's the ghost that I was looking for. It's like he's the guy that always seems to be central in her life, that she relates or can relate to, because he's always there. And then when suddenly he said, I'm going to be leaving town, that's like the pivotal moment in the film where she decides that she needs to leave town now.
Yeah, that's
when she sees him leave, she's like, holy crap, he was right.
Well, it's a running thing through the movie, like the bus dude. And it's
Norman.
Probably my favorite thing in the movie, because there's a point earlier, right before she really starts to panic, about all this stuff. I feel like because there's that whole sequence too where she, the shit with the college doesn't work out, and she, gets with Seymour, and they're talking. She says drunkenly to him something about moving in, and he thinks she's serious, and she's realizing she doesn't want it. She's overwhelmed, so she tries to move in with Becky again, and then gets that and realizes she doesn't want that either. But prior to that, there's a point where he says to her when she tries to tell him that no buses are coming, he says, "You don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And then later on, it is proven right when he gets on the bus, and I took that as like, a subtle way of saying like she's still young, she doesn't know what the fuck she's doing. Like,
I just remember
you got to get out of your comfort zone and find out.
You know what's interesting about that? Because I did some reading before we started, but apparently some people, well, actually quite a lot of people, came to, I think it was Terry Zwigoff himself. Is it Zwigoff or Zwigoff? I've never heard it spoken.
Zwigoff, I think.
Zwigoff. Came to him and said that they interpreted the ending as being a metaphor for suicide. With her getting on the bus that, the bus that shouldn't come, basically. And Daniel Clowes and Terry Zwigoff were asked if the ending of the film adaptation was a metaphor for suicide. Daniel replied, "Yeah, it could be. It's hard to figure out why people have that response. The first time I heard that, I said, 'What? You're out of your mind. What are you talking about?' But I've heard that hundreds of times. So clearly it must say that to some people." I liked the Graduate comparison that someone made, which is that, the whole point of that ending, from what I remember, I only saw the movie once, and that was years ago. I need to watch it again because it didn't really appeal to me at the time, but I know that it's, a classic and everything, but I haven't watched it since then. But point being, the ending I know was a big kind of watershed moment in cinema, because it's like, we got the girl, we ran off, ran off happily ever after. And
what
then,
do we do now?
Exactly. Movies at that time never really showed the holy shit, what is our life going to be now? They never really showed that side of it. And I think in this case, depending on your point of view, you could interpret it very depressingly, like she's giving up and giving in to her despair, or you could say that something extraordinary out of the clear blue sky presented itself, something that should not be, that is there, and it's offering up a new path for her to at least try something new. Maybe it's not the thing, but it's a path out of her present circumstances, in which nothing can happen to her if she doesn't make that big change. And I guess that the suicide metaphor there, I guess, is if it's in there, which obviously they clearly didn't intend for it to be, but people have interpreted that way. If one is to say that, then, suicide is a choice, to kind of shuffle off the mortal coil and to go on that great journey. I mean, it's not the right choice, but it's, someone that feels like they have no other way out, doing that. And it's one of those things where I that's where I think that the ambiguity of it really does allow you to, whatever you bring to it, if you think this is a sad ending or a hopeful ending or a bittersweet ending or whatever. I kind of tend to fall into the bittersweet category, in the sense that it could be a path to a better life. It could be a path to a worse life. It could be neither. It could be, just different, or a stepping stone in a much greater journey, But I think the fact that it's a bus that should not be running, and yet it is, or rather he's able to get on the out of service bus. It's like that. I think it says a lot about the fact that you think that you have life figured out. You think that you know what the rules are, and you know how people are, how your life is going to be, and something totally unexpected can happen, whether it's positive or negative. You don't really know until it happens.
And also,
and oftentimes both positive and negative things happen with the same thing, whatever it is.
Interesting enough, both films tonight, and ended with the main.
Yeah.
The bus
Yep.
thing.
And in this one, also interesting thing, the idea that she does get on the bus that supposedly is no longer running, it helps to underscore the difference in the path that she's taking versus the one Becky's taking, because Becky is taking the conventional road. She is taking the road that essentially just about anyone in their situation would be more or less expected to take. And she is taking one that literally she had to pretty much had to make it happen on her own. Like she had to, I guess you could say she had to believe that she could take that route for it to happen, if that makes sense.
A renowned Generation X filmmaker, Kevin Smith, in his book Tough Shit, great book. He specifically in relation to filmmaking, but like with any great endeavor that someone wants to undergo, he described it as you need to have a reasonable amount of unreasonability to say to yourself that I can do this. You know, this thing that very few people attempt, let alone succeed in doing, which is kind of grandiose deliberately. But, you know, point being that if you can take the conventional route, you can take the route that is expected of you, which is kind of what Becky does. But it doesn't, to me, it never felt like she was giving up as much as she was just naturally evolving into a path that she probably would have ended up at anyway, even though she, maybe didn't plan on it, but she was like, yeah, whatever. She just something that she falls into. Whereas with Enid, like, she's taking the road less traveled, and also the road less traveled is not without risk, and or without doing something that is unexpected, and taking advantage of opportunities that are unexpected. And so you get on the bus that should not be running, the out of service bus. And where can that take you?
And if anyone wants to see it in a positive light of not suicide or whatever, but more of like life going on and life continuing, there actually is an interesting postscript to this in cinema that kind of lends credence to the idea that life does go on for Enid. I don't know if any of you are at all familiar with or had a chance to see Joe Talbot's film The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which came out a couple years ago. It's a very interesting, odd film. The critics absolutely adored it. I thought it was a little on the pretentious side, but it was still quite good. But anyway, Joe Talbot, the director, is apparently a huge fan of Terry Zwigoff. So there's a scene where the two main characters, Jimmy Fails, who co-wrote the movie and plays himself basically, and then his friend, I don't remember his name offhand, they're on a bus. And behind them on the bus, there are two women of comparable age chatting amiably with each other. And one of them is Thora Birch. And she is referred to as Becca in the film. But it was a very explicit nod to Ghost World, right down to the fact that they were on a bus. And I just thought that was a very amusing little nod that they made. And you could look at that as sort of kind of at least one filmmaker's like, yeah, I don't buy that suicide thing.
I wanted to make a statement on like what Dana's said earlier about Becky. Giving up and giving in are similar, though not the same. Point, and I look at more of it as giving in, not necessarily giving up.
Right.
But looking at the bus scene, and that I wanted to ask for those who actually either just saw the film or read the comic in the film. I remember that Enid had actually set that up. She had set it up earlier on, but I can't remember whether it was in the book, the comic, or both, where she said, I would just like to leave.
That was in the scene with That was in the scene with Seymour where they were like, you know, having their little drunken thing, and she asked him, she's like, "Why don't we just go?" And he's like, "I'm not in any condition to drive." You know, it's
Because I
like,
feel like she did do that originally in the comic as well when she was talking with Becky and let her know, like, I just want to just sometimes I just want to just take off and go somewhere and just leave. And I think that was part of it. And then she ended up deciding on the college thing, and that's the difference between one of the differences between the two is she decided on she had a different aim in one or the other, but either way it ended up in the same. She kind of set it up as a foreshadowing before leaving, which I thought was pretty cool.
And I know how she feels as far as like being stuck and like, you know, you just want to get out of your present circumstances, you know, and you, I don't know, I relate to that a lot. You know, whether she stays gone or whatever, you know, that's up to interpretation, but I can definitely relate to that feeling of like, oh, you know, I'm stuck in this place and I'll never be able to get out unless I do something drastic.
Well, and see, that's an interesting thing for the movie with me is I think if I had to attitude or like viewpoint wise pick a character that's more attractive, it's definitely Enid because she is, you know, trying to set out and do something different. But I, you know, personally definitely went a lot more the route of Becky, you know, and not because I felt like trapped. It's, I mean, I've lived here for ages. And I definitely did the whole like, well, I guess I'm grown up now, so I'm just gonna, you know, like buy a barbecue grill and a minivan and collect a bunch of crap, you know.
Well, I mean, and they say collecting is and I've thought about this when I've done this. That I think it was the character Seymour that said collecting is a way to fill the void. I agree and disagree with this. I had a long thought. I had a long think on this. And I did it a little bit the first time I saw it, but I wasn't as much of a collector of movies back then. I was more of a collector of comics back then. But you know, and I think about it, and it's a yes and a no, because even with everything, people still collect things. People still do these things. People want to have that. I think there is an innate thing. I do think that dismissing it only as a way to fill the void, that if you're a collector, then obviously you have something missing in your life, is not the right way to look at it.
Well, you know who summed it up the best was actually Norman Bates when he talked about taxidermy. You know, he's like, you know, a hobby's supposed to pass the time, not fill it. And you know, he's absolutely right. You know, if it becomes a way of life, if you kind of brand yourself that way, and that's kind of all that you do, and I've been guilty of that, you know, myself. You know, and I've become a lot less that way, largely because, you know, I've had to be a lot more of a responsible adult, and I have 2 cats to think about now, and that kind of stuff. You know, I do still collect things and all that, you know, so I haven't stopped. I've just slowed, or rather, I've done more quality over quantity, that kind of stuff. But, you know, it's one of those things where, like, when that wasn't the case, you know, I had no pets, I had no love in my life, I was still under my parents' thumb. I, you know, felt totally trapped and totally, you know, in such a state that I wasn't getting where I wanted to go with my life and that kind of stuff. And so you do turn inward, you do try to kind of surround yourself with the adult equivalent of like comfort blankets, basically, which can be whatever it is you're interested in. When it becomes a way of life, then it really does become a way to fill the void and to, you might even say, escape the void, you know, escape the void that is your life. And it's a very depressing feeling. And, you know, the collector bug definitely it's a short-term solution to it, but it's a suboptimal solution. And, you know, it's such that I'm glad that I have largely, you know, because I've got other sources of meaning now, and I have other, things that I'm putting my energy towards, I'm trying to not fall into that trap, which I most certainly was for a lot of my 20s, just because of these other circumstances. And that's where I relate to Enid in the sense that I still haven't been able to physically make a change yet, as much as I would like to. I haven't been able to physically make a change, but I have had to do something drastic, relative to what I would have been used to, as far as your parents, your family, they're holding you back, you get rid of them, you cut them out of your life. And, you do a lot of big life changes that allow you to, take that next step. So, I mean, I've definitely seen what that does and how it is scary. It is risky, but you can't grow otherwise. Or but again, like with what Mo was saying, sometimes people don't have to do things that dramatically. Sometimes people can take the road that's more traveled, like Becky kind of thing. Take her path, and they're perfectly happy with that because they don't see it as like a big infringement on their person,
It's just,
on their character.
But
no
but
hate
is
to
it?
anybody that's not like naturally designed to just slip into that shit. I mean, some people want more, and that's awesome. I appreciate the things that come from those people. I just unfortunately wasn't one of them.
See, I disagree with the concept with Becky because, again, she's just trying to find herself as well. Her thought and solution is to just jump into the world of work, get out on her own, be independent. But we don't see her years later. We don't see her thoughts.
No.
I mean, I myself, my first thought was, I get through grad school, I jump into a career, and yes, I had independence. I had a career, I had a full-time job. Yet there was still a void there because, again, it was just throwing myself directly into work. And again, you don't find that out at first because, again, you're trying to say this is what fits us in.
Yeah.
But is that what we really want in life? And again, we don't see Becky's struggle with it because that sort of solution to life does not present the problems early on. It presents the problems years later.
Right.
So again, I don't feel like that was a solution for her. I think that was a solution in her head, but I think that she has more of a story down the road.
Yeah,
Right,
but
but in the purposes of
she could have a midlife crisis for all we
yeah,
know.
for the
or
purposes of this story, though, it's like that's the choice she makes in the moment.
yeah,
And
she could have a midlife crisis for all we know, or she could be happily married with a bunch of kids, and that's it.
Well,
You
again,
don't
and that's
know.
that's an age thing as well because when you're in your 20s, when you're in your teens, when I was first looking at that, to me that was the end of Becky's story. She had made her decision, that was the end. Because when you're in your early 20s, that's it. That's what life is. 30s, that's old. 10 years, that's a long time. These things are there. 1 or 2 years, that's a lifetime. That's the thing. But when you watch it later on, when I've watched it now, my thought is she really happy, or is she merely trying to do what is expected of her
right,
and still left with that void?
and
I
she
think-
probably isn't terribly happy. She's probably
I mean-
wants to think she is.
Realistically, no matter which way you swing it, you got to have a little bit of both if you want to be like truly happy and like responsible or whatever.
Right.
The troubling thing for me is her buying all the basic suburban like stuff to furnish her house, like those cups or those dumb curtains. She's thinking she's got to give up the weird kid shit or the eccentric stuff. And I mean, for me personally, I never did that. I never stopped. All the shit I collect, it should have just always done, So when I became a dad or an adult or whichever one, it's like I just held on to that stuff. But there was that element of like, okay, I've got to grow up and like get a job and make sure I can pay bills and
Well,
be self-sustaining and all
the
that.
difference between Enid and Becky, I think, is that Becky to me seems like someone for whom her kind of snideness and her antics with Enid and all that stuff, it seems like it's kind of a phase, or like it's just something to do because you're young and you're bored and the internet doesn't exist yet, and so what else are you going to do? So for her it seems kind of like a phase, and so therefore once she gets a job and does all this stuff, and that's the next stage, and that's just what you do. Whereas and she also seems like she's more okay as a result of that, more okay with casting aside childish things, quote unquote, however you want to phrase that, putting one's toys away and becoming a woman, or a man, woman, a responsible adult, however, whatever you are, a responsible adult, as I like to say, because I think of speaking of the Three Stooges, if I dig, it was a baby they were trying to calm down, and it was like, that can only be calmed down by an adult. Oh, if only we could find an adult, and but yeah, that's what happens. Like she puts away the childish things and becomes a responsible adult, or so she is on that path. Whereas with Enid, she is trying to say, well, I don't want to be like everyone else. I want to be this person that is going against the grain, but it also doing that to the extent to which she does that can be a very lonely, very self-isolating existence. So like Mo said, the balance has to be achieved between those two, but that's also why, like, when you look at them at the start, they're really not that different from each other, and then as their paths diverge, as the different stressors of life present themselves, then you see them start to differentiate more, and you see the choices that they make, which of the two ends of the spectrum they tend to gravitate towards more, and also to what degree their friendship has the strength to last, because people can be very different from each other and still be good friends, and then sometimes those differences get in the way too much, and
especially around that age.
Oh yeah, well, people tend to drift apart pretty strongly when they're that young and that relatively undifferentiated.
And speaking of the stressors, I do want to mention as well, I want to make sure we get all the significant characters at least a shout out. I did not even recognize Terry Garr in the role of Maxine. But was that?
Oh, I said, I recognized her right away.
But you have this former girlfriend of her father who he hooks back up with, and that's a big part of what pushes Enid over the edge of making that decision. She's like, okay, well, if I stay here, I'm going to have to deal with this person I never cared for, apparently. So that's like, yeah. So you could almost say it was more of an excuse for her to leave, but still. But I thought that was kind of an interesting little element to throw in as well. And I gotta give a shout out to Brian George as Josh's boss, because Brian George is great. I like him in everything I've seen him in, and he was a fun character.
Good shout out to that. Good.
What's that?
I was gonna say, does anybody like me see Enid and Becky in the yoga hosers characters?
Oh god!
Yeah, a little bit.
Both in, of course, Tusk, which we've covered.
Yeah.
And yoga hosers. That's I swear that's Enid and Becky right there.
And it could have been an inspiration. It could well have been an inspiration.
Well, you talk about, Kevin Smith is one of the consummate Generation X filmmakers, and Dante and Randall are that same kind of duo of like, we don't know where we're going and that kind of stuff. And the Colleens are sort of the next generation female Canadian equivalent of that, So it's definitely in the same vein as what other Generation X kind of duos. Where are we going?
He's even applied a little bit of that value to Jay and Silent Bob. Come to it.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Well, actually, he's kind of Kevin Smith in particular is kind of the master of the hetero life mates who are trying to navigate this crazy
Right.
this crazy thing
sorry
called
to
life.
boot that.
I know. Which totally off topic, but just on the record, I don't hate yoga hosers like a lot of people do.
That's
It makes
I
me
don't
wonder
hate
if
yoga
there wasn't.
hosers.
I've still not yet seen it in
Right.
its entirety. So
All right.
Neither have I.
So I
think
do.
you would get.
I do
I think
want.
you'd get a kick out of it, Mo. I really do. I think you would enjoy it.
We're kind
especially-
of.
I think Enid would too because it's
Right.
weird and it's not mainstream at all.
Right. I think she'd probably get a kick out of Tusk. Actually, the
Oh yeah.
but we're getting kind of close to 2 hours here. So, does anyone else have anything else they really, really want to say about character or plot before we move into the other stuff?
We've
I
covered,
like that there is one.
Right.
covered a
Yeah.
pretty good swath of everything, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. So next up, then, let's move into the production aspects of the film. I've already mentioned my belief that the costume design was thoroughly underrated, and I would say as well the production design overall. Apparently Zwigoff gave his camera operator specific instructions. Apparently, I saw an interview where he specifically cited Dick Tracy and X-Men as comic book movies that he felt people didn't take them seriously because they tried too hard for a particular look, I guess you could say. That wasn't like there was more I don't want to say comic booky, but I guess that's kind of what he was saying. But like
Stylized.
very stylized in a sense. I don't really see X-Men as terribly stylized, but it's got a little bit of that vibe. But Dick Tracy, oh god, we talked about that. That was
That's
heavily stylized.
Stylized with a
But-
capital S.
But like with this one, he apparently gave his camera operator instructions to give the film a slightly heightened look. Like it's very plainly shot in a lot of ways, but the colors are brought up just a bit. It's a very colorful film. I was just wondering if anyone else agreed with that assessment from Zwigoff, or
yeah,
if they felt,
I do. I think it evokes its indie comic
Yes.
roots very nicely.
like it's the type of thing that looks really nice if you don't know that it's based on a comic, and then when you
Right.
do, it like makes it even better because,
Right.
like Dane said, it really does give you that indie comic vibe.
It's
And this
it's
is one that
it's shot very similarly to something like Juno, where it's like it's not overly like the scenery, the cinematography is kind of deliberately not all that extraordinary, and yet there are some extraordinary visual elements that we can latch onto, like especially with wardrobe.
right.
You got that same vibe with like Juno's wardrobe. Like it's ordinary, but it is still distinct. Yeah, there are still distinct colors that pop out.
And
similar
there's a remarkable number of different locations in this one, like all the different places, and they must not have had a tremendous budget. So I really am kind of, when I looked at it this time around, I was thinking about like, wow, the production values on this are pretty darn solid, given that this guy was known for directing 2 documentaries and that he had, a very uncommercial script.
Yeah.
Well, you also
on-
look at like Kevin Smith films of the period where again shooting in real locations on a very small budget. Even something like Mallrats, which was significantly more than Clerks budget-wise, but was still
Mallrats
very.
is kind of a similar vibe visually. I admit.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm getting at, is that
Yeah.
even though that by studio standards was peanuts, it was only like a
Yeah.
$6 million movie, but was quite wealthy compared to
Mhm.
Clerks. But in
Right.
both cases, you have these very, very real, ordinary locations with characters that their wardrobe is not totally out of the ordinary. Like, they're not wearing superhero costumes per se, but they're wearing very visually distinct costumes.
Except for when Enid
except for the
shows
Bat-
up in the Batman mask.
Yeah.
Yes, except for the
Catwoman,
Batman
more of a
mask.
Catwoman mask.
Or
Um,
Catwoman, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I had a question for y'all who are more visual and looking. Did any of y'all see this? I know the reference to the title Ghost World,
Mhm.
which I didn't get when I watched the movie, but I got when I read the comic, which referenced basically a graffiti artist that had
Mhm.
been writing Ghost World on closed shops throughout the area, and especially close to the bus stop with our main hero, really the guy waiting for the
Right.
bus. In my opinion, I consider him the main hero of the story.
Mhm.
But did they do that? Did they even show graffiti that said Ghost World in it or reference it?
I
in the
didn't
movie
notice
itself?
it,
I
and
didn't
I'm
notice
usually a
that.
big fan of graffiti in movies. I didn't notice it, but I could
Mhm.
very well need to just watch it again. I was pretty enamored with some of the other
Mhm.
stuff, like wardrobe.
Because
Well,
Drink.
it
I
kind of
didn't notice
reminds
it
me.
until
It
the
reminds me a
comic.
little. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like how, Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange does not have the title referenced in the film in the way that Anthony
Mhm.
Burgess's novel does.
Right.
But we can also kind of discern the meaning just from the words themselves. I mean,
Yeah.
you think about Ghost World. It's a world in which people either might as well be ghosts because they're kind of living this existence that is emulating living people but is not that way, and they feel like they're already dead, or they're just kind of going through the motions, or at least that's how someone like Enid would feel, and she doesn't want to end up like that. So I think there's a lot of connotations that you can get just from the words themselves and
I
the
think
context.
there's also a sense of society as a whole kind of moving on and leaving things behind, like
Yeah.
the different businesses that get remade and brought over. I think they touched on that with that 50. We got to talk about that 50s diner. That was such a with quote unquote Weird Al.
So there wasn't exactly. So there wasn't real.
Right.
It was more of an abstract.
I think
Than
so.
it was it was an actual like in the comics.
I think
So I
so.
was just
Yeah.
wanted to double check, and that was just my thought. 'cause
I
some
had
of y'all
forgotten
might
about that, but
have
I
seen that.
remember now that you mention it. Yeah. So, of course, again, with the production, my biggest part, again, if in 2001, if there was an Oscar for use of music in film, this would be the poster child for that. They had I thought, a phenomenal use of found music, terrible new music, and that score by Dave Katay. It's criminal that the music branch deemed it ineligible for an Oscar. It's just criminal. I can't. I mean, that score, I love that. It's so much. But what's everyone else's thought on it?
I'd go as far as to say that I'd probably, I mean, I will eventually grab myself a copy of this just because it is good and deserves to be in the collection. But if I can find that soundtrack that you have, as soon as you mentioned it, my interest was piqued, because I'd probably rather maybe own that than the movie. Obviously, like as I said, I will get both, but well, hopefully. But the soundtrack is dope. I agree. It's very good use of music.
Definitely distinct and definitely in the same vein as like Crumb, music wise, which makes sense. The one thing I wanted to, make sure that we get on the books here is that so we talked about, like with Dick Tracy, we talked about how that film had a crap ton of Oscar nominations, largely in the design and makeup categories and that kind of stuff, and all deservedly so. I mean, it was so ahead of its time and kind of still is in a lot of ways. But that movie for the longest time was the leader as far as at least nominations for a comic-based film, if not, wins, until it tied with Black Panther for wins.
Right.
But then, not so much in the way of the screenplay categories until you get to this film with its Best Adapted Screenplay nomination.
The only Oscar nod it got was the first ever comic book one for a screenplay. So yeah,
which
that
is
was
still
awesome.
which is still very uncommon even today. Like the one that really jumped out at me a few years ago was Logan having gotten that nomination also, which I was like, good for you, because I thought that screenplay was so good. And then was I can't remember if Joker got that particular award nomination. I need to look it up really fast.
Joker was up for screenplay.
Let me see. I can't remember. Yeah, Best Adapted Screenplay. It was. Didn't win, but it was up for it.
Black Panther up for that? I can't remember.
Not for screenplay, I don't think.
So I don't think any of the MCU movies have been, have they?
Not for that particular award, but like my point is that I think this movie deserves a lot of praise just in and of itself.
Right.
And specifically in relation to our theme of comic book adaptations in general, but especially the non-superhero variety. The fact that this did kind of help to at least get the foot in the door, I think that's a big deal.
Plus, it was something of a rarity because, again, it was a collaboration between the director Zwigoff and the original author Daniel Clowes.
Yeah,
it's a rarity for the original author to get an Oscar-nominated screenplay. It happens. Gillian Flynn, I think. No, I don't think she got the nod, but a lot of people thought she could have for Gone Girl. There were a couple recently, I know, that did. But very rare. Usually when you adapt your own work into a different medium, a lot of people feel like people tend to have trouble doing that.
Yeah.
So for Clowes to do that was an extreme rarity, which is really cool.
And especially at that time with the fact that it was based on a comic, and yet that was at a time when not only were those not as commonplace, but also if they were, people did not advertise that front and center in the way that they do now.
I think this one, I went into it aware that it was based on a comic, but like incidentally aware. You know what I mean? I know I'd never heard of the comic prior to reading about the film. I don't recall at what point I became aware that it was based on a comic, but it wasn't something that they pushed heavily, I think, in the early marketing. I'm pretty sure of that. Yeah. And again, on the Oscar thing, I'm just going to throw out there once again, I've said many times on this channel, Steve Buscemi was widely considered to be a snub that year because a lot of people thought he was going to get a nod for this movie. And he deserved it. I mean, he really...
I think he deserved it for this role. He's the one that I actually related to throughout the movie.
He has never had an Oscar nod.
So I wanted to say that with Buscemi, I think that this movie does something that is cool because it relates to outcasts in multiple areas. Because when you're young, you can relate to Enid and Becky. But when you get to the age, sadly, that I am at, you can relate more to Steve Buscemi's character. When you look at the potential emptiness that's out there, and reality is that both Enid and Becky have that chance of being Buscemi's character at the end of the day. And to bring it back to the music, because we were there, I want to say that music-wise, I actually look at this one as kind of cool, though I do think Crumb's music was better. I look at this more on par with Juno, though Juno was also better. Actually, Juno, the soundtrack, still to this day, I think I actually own the soundtrack to that one. Still sits with me. One of these days we have to cover Juno as well, because I do feel like those movies have a lot in common.
They do,
though slightly different in generation. I think Juno applies more to the millennial generation, whereas Ghost World applies more to Gen Xers.
Juno really, you talk about a foundational movie for me in terms of writing. Juno is way up there for me. I learned so much from it.
Okay.
And I got introduced to the Moldy Peaches, which I still like to this day.
And gave the world Diablo Cody, who I think is an amazing writer.
The actually one of my pickups this week was her re-teaming with Jason Reitman for Tully, which was also an excellent film. Really good one.
That's a great film. I found it incredibly hard to watch, but like in a good way. I mean, like it was me saying that is a rarity, because I can watch a lot of traditionally tough to sit through movies, but like that film really kind of got to me in a way that most movies don't, and I give her applause, her and him applause for doing that to someone like me, and I usually don't get affected by movies like that.
So it is time, I think, to bring this to a nice little close here. I'm going to start on the other
close, if you will.
I'm going to start on the other side of my icon with Brandon this time and go clockwise. If everyone wants to do like favorite moment, scene, character, what have you.
For me, I don't know. I like a lot of this. I particularly like the scenes that have to do, I think, with Norman, was it? The one waiting for the bus?
Right.
There is something existential about that. Maybe if you had talked to younger me, it would not have been the same. But something about that always grabs me. And with her getting on the bus, actually with the scene where he gets on the bus when they don't expect it.
And her reaction to it,
it just speaks to me in many ways, and at that, it just becomes my favorite scene at that.
All right. How about you, Forrest?
Favorites? I would probably have to agree with the old man waiting for the bus.
All right, Mo.
I think you guys know me pretty well at this point, and I already said that the bus was my favorite, but we can't not mention that scene where old Steve Buscemi tries to get Froggy up in the mini mart, and Nunchuck Dude takes him down. That was like one of the best scenes in the movie. He's like, "Hey, some bitch, you ain't so cool now, are you?" And he's just like choking him out with those nunchucks.
What about the end of the movie where Buscemi fights back?
Oh
the
man,
post-credit scene, yeah.
I did not know about that, and I need to watch it immediately.
That is the most Kevin Smith character in a non-Kevin Smith film I had ever seen.
That's very true.
He's amazing, and there is a certain parallel with him and that dude that chokes Beavis and Butthead for nachos sometimes. Like, he's just always going to the mini mart. I think he's also got a mullet, drives a shitty old T-Bird, but he doesn't have that sweet six-pack or those Chuck skills. Forget him. But that'd be my favorite right there.
Well, to quote another awkward teenager movie, but from a totally different generation, nunchuck skills, bull hunting skills, computer hacking skills. Girls only want to go out with boyfriends who have great skills.
Yeah, actually, I could see this dude be fitting right in Napoleon Dynamite and stealing the movie completely.
Yeah,
sadly, yes.
I love Napoleon Dynamite to death.
Want to see him have like a sports showdown with Napoleon's uncle?
Oh man! So that's going to happen in the sequel, right? So,
Why
Dan,
not?
how about you?
I like actually getting on the bus at the end, of course. I do really like a lot of just the initial snide remarks that the two girls have when they're at the graduation, whatever, prom, I guess, at the or whatever the event is at the end. Like just some of the initial conversations they have of just the snide remarks they have about their classmates. I was like, yeah, I know what that's like, and so it's that kind of covers the two poles. You got the naivete at the beginning, but also the possibilities for change at the end.
All right. What about you, Dave?
I would have to say my favorite moment is when he's with that other woman, and he calls Enid, and she's like, "What? You're just gonna go ahead and have sex right there in the room on the first date?" And he's like, "What? No!" And then he puts it down, and he's like, "Oh, that was my mother."
Right.
So, I liked Steve Buscemi as a character. Like I said, I don't know. This movie didn't connect with me like I thought it would have, and I guess it just feels disjointed. And
well, you didn't have any actual ghosts in it.
Well,
Yep.
expecting it to have ghosts.
Which now, what if
that he did to her friend?
What if the Ghostbusters showed up in this movie? Then it would really be a ghost
Or
world, wouldn't it?
Patrick
Oh,
Swayze.
and did like they did in the Casper movie.
Yeah.
I'm talking about that Patrick
Somebody
Swayze
else.
ghost up in there, doing some clay molding or whatever.
Hey, Patrick. Actually, Ghost did have some frightening moments in it. Those little
did.
those
This
little
is
hell
my
demons, those are
train!
nasty.
Like that guy always freaked me out.
Those
Those
are
hell demons.
creepy.
All right. So, for me personally, obviously, I love the movie, so it's hard to pick an exact favorite. Again, there's a couple of scenes in the art class that I wouldn't call them favorites because I hated the teacher at those moments, but I just felt for Enid at a couple of those scenes, and even poor Philip, I felt a little bit for him. And there were just certain great moments with Seymour. But honestly, I kind of inclined to agree. Oh, and I love the scenes with the nunchuck dude. I mean, they're just fun scenes. But I'm kind of inclined to agree with the idea of the guy getting on the bus finally, and then Enid at the end, if only because we had Dave Coute's wonderful score underscoring those moments, and it just added so much to the scene. And but the part where he gets on the bus finally and her reaction shot of like, holy crap, he did it. It's kind of cool. It's kind of like she's kind of inspired by him, and that was pretty cool. So I guess that's my ones. So I guess we are ready to move along, huh? I guess I'll hand it back to Dave at this point.
Outro.
We have to metaphorically get on our buses, don't we?
Indeed. Oh yeah. Well, let's do that then. I guess we'll go counterclockwise, starting with Dane, and then Brandon can give us the schedule, and then Dave can lead us out. How about that?
Yep.
So,
And Forrest and Mo as well.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Go counterclockwise, well, at least the way I'm looking at it.
I like how you switch it up every now and again, Jake. You're an adventurous soul.
You gotta, right?
Alrighty, Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right. Well, I am Dane Kyle, a filmmaker out of North Carolina. on a channel called Indie Horror Film Creative, where I do some unboxings, and a show called Blu-ray Views whenever I do get movies in. I was doing a lot more in the way of collecting in 2020 when I was trying to rebuild my life, which had been pretty well shattered. And, my collecting has slowed down a bit because I have had to become a responsible adult with two beautiful felines to take care of. But, I do still get things every now and again and show them off. I do want to get back into my other channel, No Money Film School, with some of the suggestions that Brandon had as far as like a deeper dive, because I was doing commentary tracks. But I would like to dive into that, do something else different to help build that channel up. But then I'm also working on some short films to try to get out there, just waiting for the vaccines to hopefully get into wider circulation so that, cast and crew doesn't get infected, all that kind of stuff. But, a lot of good things coming my way.
Alrighty.
Good deal.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Oh, me?
Yep.
My name is Mo. I do, various videos on my channel, Drunken Master Studios, but the current project and, one that's going to be ongoing long into the future is Full Moon Madness, which is a show I'm doing just covering movies by Full Moon Features. Very quickly on its way to being the largest compilation of reviews for that studio, probably on the entire internet. I'm just about finished with my second wave of reviews. Just got to crank out one for Doll Man versus Demonic Toys, and we'll have that up there for you guys. So definitely worth tuning in for. Lots of cool stuff going down. Lots of Full Moon stuff on its way in the mail right now, and a ton more once that STEMI check hits. So get over there, check me out, and I will leave you with these wise words. Practice with them chucks, eat that beef jerky, because that shit'll save your life.
Oh yeah,
Right.
you're trying to
In the
achieve
40s.
you're trying to achieve the fullest of the full moons, I guess.
Yeah, dude. Got to get thick.
All right. What about you, Forrest? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, Forrest Bennett, film producer based in New York. Also, also I do vlog on my channel, on my YouTube channel, Forrest B. Bennett, where I mainly just talk. I mainly cover movie pickups. Actually, I do movie pickups. Yeah,
Some good ones.
yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Alrighty. What about you, Brandon? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. We are all about the physical media on our channel. As of course the vaccines spread, eventually Jake and I will start filming together again. But in the meantime, we've been doing our typical stuff with the vlogcasts. Our most recent one where we've talked about cancel culture and its effect on media, which is a very cool I thought was a good conversation. And we have also been doing various other things. We do our Oscar coverage, which we are going to, we're continuing to ramp up on. So we'll talk more about that as time goes on. And I've also been doing a little bit more added video game content. I've done 2 digital collection videos. Don't get used to those. I don't like talking about digital collections. But I am going to be doing a Let's Play series starting this Friday, where I am going to go through my entire Steam collection, and just because Steam is one of those few areas where you buy a bunch of games, they're like $1 and so, and then you never play them. Well, this time I'm going to play them all badly.
It's true.
And the start of this is going to be where I am stumbling through the puzzles that would normally be simple in 11th hour. So if you want to see a person fail very badly at a video game, you should tune in on Friday. But with that being said, of course, I also work with Inside Movies Galore, and I help with the scheduling around here. So our non-superhero comic book movie Western style month is almost to a close. But we have one more week to go, and what better way to end it than with an anti-hero in the form of Judge Dredd, where we will be doing both of their movies, both the Stallone film and the newer film that they made, kind of back to back. So join us then for that lovely stuff. Oh, and of course Monday's discussion where we do our anime month on my channel and discuss
Afterthought.
Steins Gate.
Yeah. As an afterthought. Jeez.
And Jake, why don't you tell us a little
Okay.
bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I am Jake. I am the co-host of Septum Sin versus the World, and as he mentioned, we are looking forward to our Steins Gate discussion next week. It'll be good times, and I think he's already pretty well covered most of the channel. We've got a lot of fun Oscar content coming up, a lot of fun pickups. We've had some pretty fun pickups the last few weeks. And well, that's really all I'm going to go on about tonight. Thanks for joining us for this one.
And my name is David Streggy. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore, as well as Illusions of Grandeur, which is where I moonlight under doing my own video pickups and video reviews. And hopefully you get a chance to check out some of my latest reviews and video pickups, because I have had quite a few uploaded within the last week or so. And I am also looking forward to next week, where we'll be talking about the anti-hero Judge Dredd, all in one night. So, as she said. But in any case, hopefully you enjoyed our discussional group chats today, and hopefully you get a chance to check out some of our other chats we've had tonight. So thank you for listening. Have a great day, evening, or morning, wherever you are, and thank you all for joining us for another exciting atmospherical discussion. So thank you, and have a great evening.
None
Not all.
Never leave home without them. It'll save your life.
40s and chucks.
All day.
Oh.
Well, I think you hit the wrong button.
We lost. We lost.
We
Dave,
still
huh?
we're still live. It looks like.
Looks like.
So yeah. So what about them Dodgers? How they doing lately?
I think they beat the Buccaneers in the Stanley Cup, bro. Last night.
Well, you know how I am about golf.
Yes, clearly.
It's like the line from The Big Lebowski. Obviously, you are not a golfer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Though I did, as we were talking, file in Last Action Hero and News of the World into the collection. So
Good times. I'm glad you were able to get that straight.
well,
Fun
and
fact.
Jake got me to look at that darn sale, and that is a good sale Amazon is doing.
I know.
Arrow's got one coming up too, actually. So
Yeah.
Well, actually, one of the items on the Amazon sale was the Arrow edition of Mallrats. So got
they're
that
putting
coming.
some stuff back in print for the sale too, from what I read.
I got that stuff on the Fly, that Fly collection, and the Wreck
Mhm.
collection, which I've been needing to get.
Right.
Oddly enough, the fourth film normally on its own on DVD costs more than the darn set did to me. So I am perfectly happy upgrading.
So,
So it's Dave
So I don't know
glad-
if this is a fun fact or just an odd one, but the very first time I ever saw Last Action Hero 2, was the same day that I played Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation for the first time.
Wow.
At
Good
this
time.
kid
Actually-
Patrick's house, and he was like weird, you know. He'd pee his pants in the middle of the night and like try to blame it on you, you know. But he had Crash Bandicoot and Last Action Hero too, so I bit the bullet.
Priorities, man.
Exactly.
Hey, I actually